Welcome into the Draft Dynasty Podcast. My name is Jeremy Betts here on the Fans First Sports Network, where it is all draft all the time. And we are talking fantasy football this week. And right now during this offseason, it is the big discussion point for this show. And kind of going through a little bit of changes this summer without having my regular Andrew Wilbar here on the show. So we've had a couple different people on for the Draft Dynasty Podcast. I've done one solo. I'm going to go solo again with this one today. And it's going to be fun. We're going to talk about some offenses to buy into for fantasy in 2025. And I think that we're going to really dive into some really intriguing groups here as we look at where things end up and which offenses are poised for big seasons from a fantasy perspective, kind of across the board. I'm not looking at any one position. I'm not looking at like individual players necessarily. These are offenses that I think are going to produce quality fantasy assets for your fantasy team. And a lot of them are like no-brainer ones. A few of them are no-brainer ones. A few of them are maybe some of out of left field guys that maybe you're not thinking about because in the past they've been inconsistent or they just haven't lived up to the billing that maybe you were expecting or wanting for your fantasy rosters. So we're going to dive into all of that. Before we do, I think it's good to acknowledge that mini camps are over for the most part for teams across the league, wrapping up that is this week, and we are entering the drought of the offseason. There's going to be a lot of fantasy football content to talk about over the next few weeks, and I'm going to have it here for you on the Draft Dynasty Podcast. We're going to have it here for you on the Fans First Sports Network. So go subscribe to FFSN. Go to ffsn.com for all of our written content. Check out our podcast network. I also record and do podcasts for the Steel Curtain Network. So check that out if you're a Steelers fan. And we're going to have a lot of fun this off season as we talk some fantasy. So stay tuned for that. And let's just jump right into this thing. I think where I'd like to start with the offenses that I'm buying into for fantasy in 2025, I think I want to start with a team that's kind of been in the news for all the wrong reasons right now. And we maybe are forgetting just how dynamic of an offense they're going to have, even though they can't get things together as an organization when it comes to paying guys on the defensive side of the ball. That's the Cincinnati Bengals. I mean, let's just look at the players specifically that are on this roster that are going to be fantasy relevant. It's every position from a fantasy perspective. I mean, you start with the quarterback at Joe Burrow. And I mean, this is a guy who consistently ranks in the top 5 when he's healthy as a fantasy producer. He's going to put up big passing statistics every week. He has the ability to provide some rushing upside as a scrambler. He's not going to run the football like your Josh Allens or your Jalen Hurts or Lamar Jacksons, things like that. But he is going to provide you a little bit of leg usage and at the very least extending plays and making more for himself when it comes to putting together fantasy performances that you can use on a weekly basis. So starting with Joe Burrow and then moving on to the number 1 player in all of fantasy, Jamar Chase, his running mate, T. Higgins, those two guys are wide receiver 1 territory pretty easily for fantasy in 2025. I think according to the consensus board from Fantasy Pros, you've got T. Higgins as the wide receiver 13, so right on the edge of that wide receiver 1 range. And with as much as the Bengals are going to have to score this year to stay in ball games, they're going to be throwing the ball a lot. They're going to be utilizing Joe Burrow and these pass catchers a lot across the board. So get in on this Bengals offense. We know that Zach Taylor can put together really good offenses when his guys are healthy, when he has the players available to him to really run what he wants to. And it's efficient, it's effective. And we haven't even gotten to the running backs. I like Chase Brown a lot from a fantasy perspective. He's probably not an RB1, but you have to think of him in that RB2 territory. I just think that he's a guy that has a chance every week to put together huge scoring numbers. When you look at him on Fantasy Pros, he is running back 9. He's the final final running back in tier 2 that they have on their consensus board. So I like myself some Chase Brown in this offense as well. As a pass catcher, as a runner, he's going to have lanes in which to operate, and he doesn't have a lot of high-end competition in that backfield that's going to worry you about the workload that he's going to take on. So, I mean, this is just an offense that is going to operate on all cylinders as long as Joe Burrow is healthy. And even if Joe Burrow were to go down, some of the other assets are fine for keeping in your fantasy rosters. They're going to get the large portions of the target shares. They're going to get looks from whichever quarterback is in the game for the Bengals. So Mike Gesicki is at tight end there. He's currently tight end 21. So, I mean, he's going to be a streamer, but there's going to be weeks where Mike Gesicki is a player you want to roster. There's going to be streaming weeks where he goes off. So everybody on this roster is somebody to watch from a fantasy perspective. You're going to have stars like Burrow, Chase, Higgins, and Chase Brown, but you're also going to have guys who can provide you a little something on an off week if you can hit him at the right time, like the tight end Mike Gesicki. So that's my first offense I want to talk about. And these are in no particular order. I'm not ranking them by who I want to have players on, but the Bengals have been in the press for all the wrong reasons with the Shamar Stewart and the Trey Hendrickson news going on right now. Wanted to give them some love from a fantasy perspective, and just kind of remind people, settle down a little bit when it comes to the Bengals. They're going to be good this year on the offensive side of the ball, and it's going to be really good for your fantasy this year. In best ball leagues, get these Bengals early, man. Get these wide receivers, get in on Joe Burrow, stack as many of these guys as you can throughout the season. They're going to be relevant into December with this offense from a fantasy perspective. So keep it rolling there. Let's go on to an NFC squad that's not getting a lot of talk in the circles that I'm listening to and keeping up on from a fantasy perspective. Everybody wants to talk about the Lions. Everybody wants to talk about, the Eagles, and we'll get to the Eagles a little bit later. Obviously, they're a no-brainer. I have some concerns about the Lions this year. As an aside, real quick, that the loss of two of both their coordinators are going to make things a little bit rocky, at least to start out the season potentially. I don't know how Jared Goff's going to do, and I don't know how this running game is going to respond to no more Ben Johnson as the offensive coordinator and play caller there, and the loss of Frank Ragnow at center. That's going to hurt. So a little wary of the Lions offense. They don't make my list here, and not necessarily because I don't think they're going to have good fantasy players and helpful fantasy assets for you this year. I really do. I'm taking a couple of them in the first round, right? Amon-Ra St. Brown, I'm comfortably taking in the first round. Jahmyr Gibbs, I'm comfortably taking in the first round. And there's some role players outside of that too that I really like. I even like Jared Goff as a fantasy asset for the most part. I don't think he's going to be as consistent as we've seen in the last year. That's all an aside. Let's get to my next team. It's an NFC squad. It's the Atlanta Falcons. I'm all in on this Falcons squad offensively for 2025 as a fantasy relevant group. It starts with Bijan Robinson, who should be the RB1 in most leagues, right? Especially if you're doing PPR. He's going to provide you a ton of production. I have him as my RB1 right above Saquon Barkley, who clears Jahmyr Gibbs just barely. Those are my top three in order there. But Bijan Robinson broke out last year. He was already good as a rookie under Arthur Smith, but really broke out last year. You just see it. He moves differently. He's a different cat. He's incredible. He's dynasty RB1 for me. He's fantasy RB1 for redraft leagues as well. So I'm all in on Bijan. This wide receiver room, watch out. Drake London, wide receiver 9. I bet he finishes as a top 5 wide receiver in fantasy this year with Michael Penix spinning the rock his way a lot. I think Penix is ready to take a step. He's going to operate a quick strike offense that plays right into the hands, literally, pun intended, I guess, of Drake London there. And then I like Darnell Mooney as well at wide receiver. He was a solid wide receiver too for large chunks of last year after Penix took over. And even before that, when Kirk Cousins was in, even when Cousins was struggling a little bit. And I think both of those guys are going to be easily fantasy relevant. Drake London is a first round pick, in my opinion, at wide receiver. Especially if you're like avoiding running backs early, if you're going zero running back and you're just targeting these wide receivers, then you know he's one of those guys you want to have on your roster. I feel good about him as a clear-cut wide receiver one for me. He's clearly in like that very next tier behind Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and CeeDee Lamb. Yeah, probably CeeDee Lamb's up there too. AJ Brown is going to be in this ballpark as well. So I think that Drake London kind of falls in line with that. So that's my take there for those guys. Kyle Pitts at tight end, if he ends up staying with the Falcons, I'm not going to be the guy that says, overdraft him or he's going to break out fine, or he's going to be a fantasy dominant tight end, but a useful fantasy tight end. Yeah, he's going to be that. He's going to have plenty of work in a offense that's going to be pretty dynamic, I think. So right now he's tight end 19. That's a little crazy to me. I like him more than both the rookie tight ends this year by a little bit. Maybe more on par with Tyler Warren. I like him better than Dallas Goedert, who's at 14 overall in Fantasy Pros consensus rankings right now. So yeah, I think that he's being undervalued now. It's gone the other way. For too long, he's been, okay, this is going to be the Kyle Pitts here. This is going to be the Kyle Pitts here. And while I'm not saying he's a top 10 tight end necessarily, as a high-end tight end too, he's right there. So draft him comfortably in the top 20 and right around that top 15 range, I'd feel pretty good. If I waited and I ended up with Kyle Pitts at tight end, I think that's pretty good. And then Michael Penix, I think, is going to be a top 10 quarterback for fantasy football this year. And I think it's going to be pretty consistent. He's not one of these guys who makes a ton of errant throws. He's very accurate. He's got a big arm, pushes the ball down the field. There's going to be a lot of quick strike. There's going to be a lot of easy dump offs and easy completions in this offense. So I like him a lot as well. Let's move on to the third team in my list here, and it's the Las Vegas Raiders. Let's talk some Raiders here. Ashton Jeanty is a locked and loaded top 5 back from an opportunity perspective and a talent perspective as a rookie. So draft him early, comfortably. Don't feel bad about it. Don't feel stressed about it. He's going to get the rock a ton for Las Vegas this year. And with Geno Smith and a legitimate passing attack now there in Las Vegas, I think it's going to be lights out for Ashton Jeanty. He is going to just roll teams on a weekly basis. I don't know if the Raiders are going to win and be like a playoff contender this year, but they do have the foundational pieces and enough of a legit passing game now that I'm buying in. And it's a lot about Ashton Jeanty. It's a lot about Brock Bowers. And then I like Geno Smith tossing the ball to those two guys. They're going to get a lot of work. And then I actually really like, a couple of their middle of the pack receivers. His name's escaping me right now. I'm so sorry about that. But let's see. I'm going to find him here in just a second. Jacoby Myers. Sorry. Jacoby Myers. Right now he is, let's see. Where'd he go? Jacoby Myers is wide receiver 39. I like him a lot more than that. For the Las Vegas Raiders. He's probably going to be a top 30, at least for me, by the time all my rankings are out, because I like Geno Smith and because Brock Bowers is going to take a lot of the pressure off of Myers in that passing game. So buy into this offense, man. They're going to be good. They're going to be dynamic and explosive. And I'm buying into those high-end guys for fantasy, but mostly Ashton Genty, Brock Bowers. And then I think Geno Smith is going to end up being a high-end QB2 by the end of the year. So those are the guys I like right now. That's 3 offenses down. I've got 4 more to go in the second half of the show. So stay tuned. We're not going anywhere. The Draft Dynasty Podcast will be right back after this. Welcome back to the Draft Dynasty Podcast. We are going through offenses to buy into for fantasy in 2025. We've talked about the Bengals. We've talked about the Raiders. We've talked about the Falcons. And I want to talk about another team that we all know and love fantasy-wise, and that's the Eagles. You have to put them on this list. I mean, when it's all said and done, they could have the QB1, the RB1, and like wide receiver 3 or 4, right? A top 5 guy at each of those main positions. And Dallas Goedert, he's not as high on my list this year. The target share just goes crazy to the wide receivers, AJ Brown and Devonta Smith. And then Saquon takes a lot of receiving work out of the backfield. Goddard, there was some thought that he might get moved this offseason. That may still happen eventually. We'll see. But either way, I really like Jalen Hurts as a weekly top 5 quarterback in fantasy. I like AJ Brown as a weekly top 7 or 8 wide receiver in fantasy. Saquon Barkley is obviously like a top 3 weekly guy, a must start regardless of matchup. And then Devonta Smith, he's a clear-cut wide receiver too for fantasy football. He's a top 20 wide receiver for fantasy football. So, just get in on this Eagles team. We don't have to spend a lot of time on it. We know this team. Kellen Moore's no longer there, offensive coordinator, but I think they'll be just fine. I think their players now probably transcend the coaching to a degree, whereas before 2 years ago, 2023, when everything kind of fell apart, I don't think the offense was quite there yet. Now I think it is. So the skill position players specifically now that Saquon Barkley's in the fold. So get in on these Eagles, ride with them all season long. Get as many of them as you can roster. I don't care if it's redraft and you're rostering multiple Eagles, do it. It's going to be good for you. It's going to work out just fine. I like the Jaguars. Talk me out of it, but tell me why a Liam Cohen offense that from day one turned the Buccaneers into a legitimate top 10 offense every week in the NFL with Baker Mayfield at quarterback, with a really good wide receiver duo, and kind of a misfit group at running back, right? They were just very efficient with that. Now you come to Jacksonville and you've got probably a better quarterback in reality. I mean, he hasn't put up the numbers that Baker has the last couple of years, but I like Trevor Lawrence talent-wise more than Baker. I think he's a better or he's a more talented quarterback. So if he comes into his own in year 2 of his new contract, if he looks like the guy he was drafted to be with just easy button stuff on offense that Liam Cohen can provide, and then he can start doing some of the things that made him a special talent coming out of college, I think that the rest of this hums. I love Brian Thomas Jr. this year. I really like Bucky Irving and Travis Etienne. I think that they're going to be a dynamic duo at running back. Not Bucky Irving, Tank Bigsby, excuse me. I think those two guys are going to be good at running back. I'm not buying them as wide receiver or as running back ones or anything like that. But clear cut guys who can hop in a rotation at your flex spot or fill in at RB2 for you a couple weeks out of the year. maybe even be better than that. I really like what you can get there. And don't sleep on Trevor Etienne. Excuse me, that's wrong. Trevor Etienne went to the Colts, so my bad here. Travis Etienne, I keep getting those two guys mixed up as I keep talking about them, but don't forget about those two guys. Don't forget about Travis Etienne in this offense. Don't forget about Tank Bigsby, and then obviously Travis Hunter. Just another guy to clear the way for Brian Thomas Jr. And Travis Hunter is going to be a good wide receiver in and of himself. I don't love him as like a wide receiver 1 or even a high-end wide receiver 2 for fantasy as a rookie. I don't know how that work structure is going to, the workload structure is going to be for him. So I have some reservations about that, a little bit of concerns about that. But overall, I think that he's going to be a guy that makes an impact for you fantasy-wise as a rookie in dynasty leagues. I'm taking him right behind Ted McMillan as at wide receiver. And maybe I'm undervaluing, or maybe I'm overvaluing Ted McMillan, but I just think you don't have to worry about him playing both ways, right? And when you play both ways, Travis Hunter is expected to. There's more proponent for or opportunity for injury to happen. So while I like Travis Hunter a lot for fantasy, especially in the future, once we know his role and it's a little bit more defined, I think right now I'm taking Ted McMillan over him. But that's not to say I don't like this Jaguars offense. I do. They don't have Evan Ingram anymore. So that is a hit to how they've been very successful fantasy wise. He's been just really good for them from a fantasy perspective. And at a position, the tight end position, where you just don't know what you're going to get on a weekly basis. So, Brendan Strange is the tight end 1 for Jacksonville right now. I think he can handle a similar role. Honestly, he's athletic enough to do so. And I'm really excited to see what he can do this year. So even him, he's kind of like a flyer play at the end of your draft. He could be at a really lean position where it's going to be super top heavy. There's going to be weeks where he's going to provide you with tight end 1 type production as a streamer, I think. So he's a guy that you can buy into a little bit. Right now, he is the tight end 29. I think that's about where I draft him, but I think you can expect some bigger weeks out of him than tight end 29 on a fairly consistent basis. So I like the Jaguars this year for fantasy. I like the Bears for fantasy as well. Caleb Williams, I think, is going to establish himself as one of the better quarterbacks in the league, a top 12 type passer in year 2, and it's only going to go up from there. I have visions of him as a MVP finalist even this year, or in that conversation at part of this year, much like Sam Darnold was last year, maybe for the Vikings. Ben Johnson makes a difference. That running game is going to be better. The schematics, the easy button stuff, much like we talked about with Liam Cohen coming to Jacksonville, that he's a top 5 play caller in this league. Ben Johnson's probably the top play caller in this league, best offensive designer in the league outside of maybe Kyle Shanahan. So I think that when you combine that with his potential, Caleb Williams and company are going to go off the rails or off the map this year. They're just going to be dynamic in a good way, off the rails in a good way. DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, love both of those guys. Colson Loveland and Cole Kmet, individually, I'm a little lower on them because they'll take away from each other. But as a duo, they're going to be really good. And I think that they're going to really provide a lot of help to Caleb Williams, specifically in the passing game, where I think it'll help him be more efficient, give him more chances to just kind of make easy stuff happen instead of having to try to force things all the time. The offensive line will be a little bit better. Again, Ben Johnson elevates the running game. DeAndre Swift, he's going to get an RB1 type workload, right? Because that's what he is there. And I know it didn't work out with him and Ben Johnson in Detroit, but he's kind of all you got. Roshan Johnson's there, I guess, still, and you drafted a guy, but really, in reality, this is his backfield until we hear differently. So I just think that the Bears are going to have a chance to be special offensively this year with Ben Johnson leading the way. So I'm buying into the Bears. And then the last team I want to talk about, they're kind of on the fringe for me, but I wanted to mention them because it's year 2 in Greg Roman's scheme and Jim Harbaugh there in LA for the Chargers. I think they're going to actually rely on Justin Herbert a little bit more than they did last year. Love Ladd McConkey as a 100 target plus guy this next year. Trey Amos was a good pickup for them. He's going to take some of the pressure off of Ladd McConkey with his ability to stretch the field and work vertically. I like the addition that they made, additions, I should say, at running back, Najee Harris and Omarion Hampton. I think by the end of the year, Omarion Hampton establishes himself as the lead back there. Najee Harris is going to have a role though, and he's gonna have a short yardage role, and he's going to be utilized a lot because the Chargers like to run the ball under Greg Roman and under Jim Harbaugh. So get used to this offense as being fantasy relevant. Multiple guys, not just one guy like they featured the last few years, more or less. I think that they're going to have more than one guy that you're going to be able to rely on from a fantasy perspective. I don't like what they have at tight end. I think it's Will Dissly. I don't think anybody else. I don't think anybody moves the needle there at tight end necessarily. But if for some reason Will Dissly has kind of a big year, or Gadsden the second at tight end, he's kind of turned some heads in at camps and voluntary workouts. He's a guy to watch. I just don't see the tight end position being that relevant for the Chargers, but I like what they have at quarterback. I think Justin Herbert's going to be relevant. I think both wide receivers now, Trey Amos is going to be pretty relevant. Quentin Johnston's going to be a streaming type flex play in deeper leagues. I like the running back duo. So I think it's a soft buy for me on the Chargers offense. And then, just to kind of wrap things up, I didn't talk about like the Bills. They're going to be a good offense. They've got Josh Allen. They've got some young guys that are growing up. I just didn't know what to do with the pass catchers. I don't know what to do with the pass catchers there. So I left them off my list because of that. James Cook, if he plays for Buffalo this year, he's a top 6 or 7 running back. So you can buy into him all you want to. You can buy into Josh Allen as your QB1 for fantasy. Absolutely. The Chiefs are going to be a little bit better this next year with some guys coming back healthy on offense, I think. Another year in the system for Xavier Worthy. Patrick Mahomes, he's just not been great for fantasy in recent years without the explosive plays. But I think they're going to be a little bit more explosive this next year. Even though Travis Kelce is a little bit older, I like Rashee Rice coming back. Pretty high on Rashee Rice, fairly low on Travis Kelce overall, especially comparative to recent seasons. Right now, he's tight end 7. He's going as tight end 7 on the consensus board for Fantasy Pros, ahead of Jonnu Smith, David Njoku, and Mark Andrews. And right behind Evan Ingram in Denver. Yeah, I just don't know. I don't know about Travis Kelce this year. So, but the Chiefs are always going to be dynamic enough on offense to where you can utilize some of their players. Then the Broncos are fun for me too. I probably should have included them in my original list. Bo Nix, he's going to be fun. He's going to be a good fantasy quarterback this year. I think he's probably a top 12 fantasy quarterback for the course of the year. I like the receiving core to a degree. Mostly I like Evan Ingram, Cortland Sutton at wide receiver there. I love the Evan Ingram pickup at tight end for them. I think he's going to be phenomenal for them. And then RJ Harvey. And now that they just signed J.K. Dobbins as well, those two guys are going to be pretty good. And if Dobbins gets hurt, RJ Harvey's going to have a huge workload. So don't shy away from Harvey just because Dobbins is there now. I don't think that changes much for his long-term perspective over the course of this season and beyond. So dynasty-wise, it shouldn't affect you at all. And then this year, I'm still taking RJ Harvey pretty early in drafts, not like Ashton Genty levels, obviously. But, he's going to be in that back end RB2 conversation for a lot of the year. And they're going to be fun. The Broncos are going to be fun from an offensive perspective. So you can get in on the 49ers, maybe on a rebound, and maybe the Rams having a good year fantasy-wise with Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams at wide receiver now. Matthew Stafford still at quarterback there. Stafford's just not been super great from a fantasy perspective, even though he does a really good job for what the Rams are wanting to do, and that offense is still pretty dynamic overall. I like Kyron Williams a lot. So there's a lot of good offenses, but these 7 offenses that I mentioned here, just to go back through them, it's the Bengals, the Falcons, the Raiders, the Eagles, the Jaguars, the Bears, and the Chargers. Those 7 teams I am buying as very fantasy relevant offenses. The systems, the players, they're good for fantasy. So get in on these players. If your roster is made up of majority of players from these 7 teams, you're going to be doing pretty good in redraft leagues this year. And there's a few dynasty prospects in here that I really like as well, especially at running back when you're talking about like Omarion Hampton and Ashton Genty. Obviously, there's a lot of good things going on with those guys, and a lot of youth on these teams, a lot of guys that you've relied upon, but a lot of youth coming up as well that I think are going to be fantasy assets and very valuable for your team this year and beyond. So that's going to do it for me. Shorter show, 30 minutes here. We're getting out of here quick, but I wanted to talk about these teams and get a look at some of these players and trying to stack my roster as I'm going to some early drafts and some best ball drafts too. These are the offenses I want to be a part of. So that's going to do it for me. That's going to do it for us here on the Draft Dynasty Podcast from Fans First Sports. I hope you enjoyed the show. Check us out wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on X at the Bets93. You can follow me on Instagram there as well. Starting to do more content on the gram. I am soft starting a YouTube channel where I'm posting a lot of the content that I'm already doing for Fans First Sports and Steel Curtain Network, and some shorts, just some fun things as I go throughout my day and news reaches me that I want to discuss. Go like and subscribe my YouTube channel. All bets are off. There's going to be more content coming on that more consistently over the coming weeks and months as the NFL season approaches. But for now, very much in the startup phase. So I would appreciate a like, a subscribe, turn on those notifications, and be sure to follow me and follow Fans First Sports Network and Steel Curtain Network and all the affiliates with FFSN for your NFL news and notes. Until next time, keep drafting.